My NDA is expired. We have so much to say, and we can finally say it. Let's go.
The serious inaccuracies.
That is one of the most glaring red flags that something culty is actually going on.
We found a direct link between Mary Cosby and one of the most infamous cult leaders of all time.
This is the same tactic that Mary is using.
We discovered the actual reason Mary Cosby's church believes that she is God.
Welcome back to the Leaving Eden podcast. Today we are talking about Mary Cosby and the documentary Cult of the Real Housewife, which recently came out on TLC and HBO Max. We have so much to say, and we can finally say it. Let's go.
We can finally do it. Okay, so...
My NDA is expired.
NDAs are expired. We can say everything that we wanted to say for a long time. In the spring of 2024, we released a podcast episode titled, Is Mary Cosby a Cult Leader? This episode was focused on Real Housewives of Salt Lake City cast member Mary Cosby, her church, which is called Faith Temple Pentecostal Church in Salt Lake City, Utah. A few months after that episode aired, we were asked to be cult experts in a streaming documentary mini-series about Mary Cosby and her church. In October of 2024, we flew to Salt Lake City to film for this documentary, and we brought both original research and analysis. And this documentary that we filmed for eventually was released as Cult of the Real Housewife. And this documentary was mainly focused around an article, a reporting done by Cheyenne Roundtree for the Daily Beast that came out in September of 2021. Most of the information about Mary Cosby and a Faith Temple Pentecostal that was published as part of this documentary was already available to the public, either from Cheyenne Roundtree's Daily Beast article or from other interviews with Faith Temple Pentecostal members. But the original research that we had brought, that really Sadie had brought, if I'm being specific, did not appear in this documentary. And
yes, nor did we. Unfortunately.
So while TLC brought in Dr. Stephen Hassan, who's the leading cult expert, to talk about determining whether this church is a cult, the methodology that they used, in our personal opinion, was substandard. I think that's fair to say. Not this is evil and horrible. Just like, wow, I wish you would have done that differently. We were especially disappointed because we discovered in our research the actual reason why Mary Cosby's church believes that she is God, like the actual theological reason behind this. And it's much more interesting and much more deep and much more weird than any of the stuff that was talked about in the documentary. We found an actual direct link between Mary Cosby and one of the most infamous cult leaders of all time. And we found an actual deadly, one of the most infamous cult leaders, if we're being honest, in human history. And we can show on video Mary Cosby using cult mind control techniques to rewrite her followers' memories on live television. There's actual footage of this that was published as part of an episode of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, but none of this stuff was really touched upon at all. Yeah, I really wish they would have used, I felt like some of the historical details that I turned up were incredibly interesting. So I personally, I just wish that had been on there, because I think that people would have been interested in it. And I think that, obviously I don't know the reason why people do anything, but I think that a streamer underestimates their audience if they think that their audience isn't going to be interested in theological details or historical details that support why things are the way they are in the here and now. I think that there was also another reason behind why this stuff ended up getting cut out, and I'm going to get into why I personally think that was and my hypothesis about this, because this really begs the question, if what we really found, what Sadie found, I should say, is genuinely shocking, is genuinely surprising, and it legitimately connects Mary Cosby to one of the most infamous mass murderers of all time. But this was not included in the documentary. And so that kind of begs the question, why would TLC not want this? Because it's so scandalous. And, why were these revelations cut from the finished product? And, we do have a few hypotheses about this. So in this series, what we're going to do is we're going to restore what we think is the complete and full methodology to determine once and for all that this is in fact a cult. We're going to reveal the shocking secrets that we found out about this church. And we're going to go into what we consider to be a really baffling decision that TLC made about what went in and what went out. And believe me, you will find these decisions baffling too, once you hear about what it is that we discovered.
So for those who don't know me, my name is Sadie Carpenter, and I've been researching cults and mind control groups for over 10 years. I started doing this research because I realized the group that I was raised in was in fact a cult. That was a really shocking revelation that changed my life forever. It turned my world upside down. And how I dealt with my world being turned upside down at that time was really diving into research on what makes a cult and what are the different ways that humans exercise coercive control over each other. In 2020, Gavi and I started this podcast to document all of the things, the backstories that I've learned about the cult that I was born into, and also to explore other cults, the psychology behind what makes them work, and cult stories in general.
If you're not familiar with me, my name is Gavi. I am a cult researcher, and I've been working with Sadie on this project for more than 5 years, basically since the pandemic. If you're interested in learning about cults, the kind of fundamentalism that Sadie was raised in, which is very similar, if you've seen 19 Kids and Counting, if you know who the Duggars are, that's very similar to how she was raised. If you're interested in any kind of content like that, be sure to give us a subscribe, wherever you're watching this or wherever you're listening to this. We have now just made the switch to making YouTube videos, and we'll come out with a new one every week. We're going to publish new videos every single week about all of this stuff. Once we get to 10,000 subscribers, we're going to come out with a documentary mini-series about the cult that Sadie was raised in. We're really excited about doing that.
We made that series for audio only when we first started doing the podcast. And since then, we've learned so much more. I've gotten my hands on a couple extremely banned books that are tell-alls about that group, and we have more information than we had at the time. So I'm excited to get a rerun at that series.
It's going to be fantastic when we do that. So make sure that you hit the subscribe button so that we can get that, because once we get to that level, we're going to make that and we're going to put that out, and we're really excited for that. What you're watching right now is part 1 of a 3-part series. Part 2 and 3 are going to come later this week, but at the time you're watching this now, if you're watching this on YouTube in part 1, part 2 and 3 are already available on our Patreon at patreon.com/Leaving Eden podcast. So make sure that you go over there and subscribe to there. You'll get all of our content, all of our bonus content, all of our past content. Link to that's down below in the description. Make sure you head over there. Before we continue, it is important for me to thank our patrons. The Leaving Eden podcast, of course, would not be possible without the support of our wonderful audience over on Patreon. So I just need to say a big thank you to our I Gave It All to Your patrons. Your names are Kathleen Moncrief, Melissa Manown, and Todd Dale. Thank you guys so much for supporting us at the I Gave It All tier of our Patreon. Our Faith Promise Missions tier patrons, your names are Jessica Tambo, Linda Morgan, Eleanor Donahue, Jonna K. Turwee, Chad Harris, Madeline Cusick, Rob the Methodist, Hannah Ross, Stephanie Johnson, Elizabeth Struther, Marlena Stuve, Tara McNamara, Tiziana Buberini, Janine Collin, Ali Allen, Dora J, Madeline Antrim, Steve and Amy, 1010, Chris, Yafi Lavova, Jezebel Diablo, Right Away 13, Rob spends pickleball prize dollars on pickled peppers. That's a great one. I love that for you, Rob. Sacred Chickens, Helly R, God's Wiener Dog, and Backwoods Barbie 31. Thank you guys so much for supporting our Patreon. If you want to join the Leaving Eden's Patreon, you can join at patreon.com/Leaving Eden podcast, and you'll get access to bonus content, including early access to episodes and extended versions of our episodes. We hope to see you on over there. Thank you guys so much for supporting us. If you're watching this video or if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know who Mary Cosby is. But in case you don't, Mary Cosby is a cast member on Bravo's Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. She is the first lady. She is the main minister of Faith Temple Pentecostal Church in Salt Lake City, Utah, which was founded by her grandmother, Dr. Rosemary Redmond, or Mama Cosby. She's married to Robert Cosby Sr., who is her late grandmother's husband.
Yes, her late grandmother's widower, to be specific.
Yes. Not her biological grandmother. So she's married to her step. Yes, it's her former step grandfather. Yes. Yes.
The documentary and the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City go into a ton of detail on this. But basically, the grandmother, Rosemary Redmond, married a younger man, Robert Cosby. Many years passed, and then the grandmother, Rosemary, passed away, and then her granddaughter, Mary, ended up marrying her widow, Robert Cosby. Very, very weird. Also not illegal.
Mary and Robert's marriage, as well as the financial exploitation of their congregation, is these are two things that are focused heavily on in Cult of the Real Housewife, and for good reason. Mary and Robert's marriage was mainly talked about as an avenue through which power over the church could be obtained. However, I think that there are some things that really got glossed over, that paint a disturbing status of what essentially was the status quo at this church before Mary and Robert's takeover. I also have some theories about why those specific things, like there's evidence of them that was peppered into this documentary, but they were just glossed over. And I want to get into why these things weren't addressed, and we will get into why these things weren't addressed. But I want to first start and talk about how we are introduced to Mary Cosby in the first season of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, because what this first season kind of focuses on is her marriage to her step-grandfather. And this is kind of a major source of conflict in the season. I'm going to pull a clip on that.
Jen and Meredith, is everything okay?
Jen's upset with Meredith.
I'm wondering, as the host of the party, do I need to go and find out?
Just seeing the title of the clip.
You think she's
okay, I'm ready to play it.
Good luck with that Meredith. Good luck. Hey, simmer down. It's a party. I'm about real friends, Lisa.
Okay, this is just not productive. I think I'm done engaging in the conversation.
You know what?
Thank you. This is not productive.
Because that's what you always do.
Thank you. I'm disengaging. I'm not engaging.
Are you serious?
Okay, listen.
You're gonna go with Mary, who her grandfather?
You can't say that. That's not okay.
That's the truth. Oh, am I lying?
I heard that. Thank you for telling me and showing me who you are. You can call me whatever you want. Clearly, there's something about me you find fascinating because I'm always in your mouth.
I a grandpa, big deal. But if it was my grandpa that I was married to, I would not want my friend to yell that at me at a party.
Yeah.
I love how they cut to like the random lady at the bar behind them who's overhearing it and going,
And so this is kind of like how we're introduced to who is Mary Cosby on this show.
yes.
But also on display is the extreme materialism, like to a degree that feels almost out of place even on a Real Housewives show, where extraordinary wealth and materialism are like air and water.
Oh, I cannot take those. I had to be on my period to buy these. Like, I don't even
Okay.
know.
Like, I know I've seen this before, but it has been a while.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so ridiculous.
What is...
Like,
Yes. Yeah, I think like a lot of what I've seen within Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, even in like later seasons where Bronwyn joins the cast and she is a level of wealth that appears to be really different from like Whitney Rose or Heather Gay. The people who are super, super rich on Real Housewives of Salt Lake City at least sort of attempt to downplay it.
Right.
Or not make it the only fact about them. Like Jen Shah throws, thinking back to like season 1, Jen Shah throws really elaborate parties and has 7 assistants and assistants for her assistants and all this. But she's not bragging about her wealth in particular in the exact way that Mary does it is atypical of these housewife shows. They're usually more of the show don't tell type.
Right, especially when you think of somebody like Meredith Marks, who you can tell, oh, she is very, very wealthy. Mm-hmm. But, you know, there's levels of like, because
I bought a condo to
put my shoes in. Like,
there was this Mary Cosby quote, I think from season 1, where she said that she ran out of space in her home for her shoes and clothes, and every closet in the home was full, and spare bedrooms were being used for her shoes and clothes. So she bought an additional condo or rented an apartment, one or the other, to store additional possessions in.
Yeah, she's like Nemelda Marcos.
I feel like that's an insult to Imelda Marcos.
Because like the Real Housewives TV franchise is a show that it's about friendships between wealthy women. However, like a good Real Housewives show is a show that uses the lens of like femininity, materialism, and female friendships to talk about larger societal phenomena. Like,
absolutely.
Real Housewives of New Jersey is a show that is about family dynamics. And Real Housewives of Potomac is a show that's about Black women living in a society that built its wealth off of slavery. Mm-hmm. And so Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, because it's based in Salt Lake City, which, you know, the society in Salt Lake City is very based around church. It's very based around religion. So Real Housewives of Salt Lake City is a show that is fundamentally about religion. You have a woman here who is a Black Pentecostal preacher in white Mormon Salt Lake City. That's a fantastic fit for this TV show. And Mary became a popular cast member from the start because she's kind of like your problematic bestie. Like, she, you know, I'm going to roll these clips out. You know, she requires complete silence to fart.
Oh, you have to be silent. Because I have to poot. Hold on. Meredith Nelson says, I need peace, I need quiet to fart. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Meredith just does it, yeah. Brooks is so fascinated.
He's like... Or, you know, she has these devastating roasts that she delivers towards her cast members.
How would you describe Meredith's clothing style?
I need to be in your next runway show, right?
I agree.
Are you really asking me this? Yeah, actually, I like... let me see. She doesn't have bad... I'm not saying... Oh, gosh. Come on, Mary.
My favorite moment of Mary Cosby, though, is the first beer that she ever drinks is a Miller High Life. And she drinks it because Miller High Life is the champagne of beers, and she thinks that Miller High Life is a classy beer for fancy people.
Oh, okay.
Have you not seen this one?
I don't know if I've seen this one.
Oh, it's classic.
I hear one of you maybe hasn't had beer before.
I haven't.
So are you familiar with champagne, though?
Yes, I am.
You guys are drinking down very young, 2003. In 2003, it was a heat wave. 5,600 people died. And it made the best grades of all time.
Mary Cosby moment.
Well, this is the champagne of beers.
Really?
So Miller High Life, the champagne of beers.
What year is it? Don't get it.
Raise a glass.
I think it's delicious. What do you think, Mary?
I like it.
I had no clue that there is like an upscale beer. It's
oh, honey,
it's regal.
Like in a show where being rich and out of touch can make you iconic, Mary Cosby is an idol. Like she's just so unintentionally hilarious. And
yeah, and her like little malapropisms, like she's always, I don't know if you pull any clips, but she's always getting vocabulary words almost right.
Yeah.
In a way that's very funny.
Or there's the part where she confuses the word predator with pornography, or there's the, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's kind of constantly confusing words in a way that I might even call cute, for lack of a better word. Like it's funny, it's entertaining.
Endearing for sure.
Endearing, there you go, that's the right word.
From the start, however, like, you know, Mary Cosby is a really entertaining cast member for a show like Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. However, from the start, there's things here that seem amiss. The two things basically are her money and her family situation. And in season 1, episode 6, I want to point to this, that Mary lets it drop kind of in passing that her cousin Charlinda is her maid, has been her maid for 20 years, but despite this, she hardly knows Charlinda on a personal level. And then on the season 1 reunion, she lets the audience know that Charlinda has turned against her, which I'm not sure what that means. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. And I think, you know, maybe now we have a better idea of what that means.
Let's get this party started. Ooh,
okay.
Let's start it. Let's start it. Charlinda is my grandmother's brother's daughter, and she's been with me for like 20-something years. We're not close at all. Like, I don't know her life and what she does outside of what she helps me with. But at the end of the day, we're family.
That's a crazy thing to admit on television.
Yeah. You know, sometimes people, I don't know, Gavi, if you've ever heard of this happening on or off television, sometimes people admit things that maybe they shouldn't admit in public. So over a year ago, Gavi told me that I needed to start watching Real Housewives of Salt Lake City because he thought that Mary Cosby was running a cult. I guess this is probably like 2 years ago now that you told me to start watching this.
Yeah,
so I start watching.
We put out the episode in, I want to say, spring of 2024. Okay. So it was probably about 2 years ago that I told you about this.
Yeah. It was probably more than that because you have to tell me a lot of times before I watch something.
Yeah.
To be honest. So I started watching, and in the first few episodes that Mary Cosby's church was shown, I thought that Gavi was like totally 100% off base. All I saw was a pretty typical Pentecostal church. The differences that I saw from churches that I was familiar with or churches that I was raised in, I just chalked up to like, oh, that's just a different worship style. It's just a different church culture difference between Pentecostal and Baptist. But when Mary says that Charlinda has turned against her, that is one of the most glaring red flags that something culty is actually going on here.
And on this show, we've talked a lot about different kinds of churches and different, you know, I don't think that whether or not something is a cult is an aesthetic. Is as much to do with aesthetics. I think that a lot of times aesthetics can come from something being very culty, but when you have a church where it is like being slain in the spirit and speaking in tongues and things that you see that are typical of a Black Pentecostal church, that doesn't necessarily make something a cult just because it doesn't look buttoned up. And I'm trying to think of a right word that isn't like... I
would simplify that to say that white supremacy is unfortunately really common in American Christianity and American evangelical Christianity. And when we take something that is inherently associated with Black Christianity and just slap that cult label on it, that can perpetuate that historical harm of white supremacy is caused to religion in the United States in general, and people in the United States in general, people of color in general. So I think it's a responsibility to be careful to not just put that label of this is a cult or they're the holy rulers or whatever on anything that we don't like or anything that makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable, which is where I started out with being so cautious about Mary's church. And then I started seeing all of the cult signs, and oh my goodness, there are so many cult signs.
I think that was very well put. And that's the thing. In the first season of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, Faith Temple Pentecostal is portrayed to be kind of like a normal, fairly normal-ish Black Pentecostal church. Mm-hmm. And it gets some screen time in a storyline in which cast member Whitney Rose is bringing her father to this church to try to, because he's going through substance abuse recovery. And she thinks that bringing him to
Sorry, Gavi, I thought you were going to say he's going through that haircut.
Oh, God, that haircut. I don't know if that was a haircut. I think that was a wig. Whatever that was.
Either way, clearly that man was going through some stuff. He was having a time.
Yeah, he was going through something. But he's brought to this church, and really the way that this church is portrayed on the show in that instance is quite positive, in that there's a lot of, focus on healing and the focus on, we can heal you of this problem. Now, I'm not personally a fan of faith healing, and on this show we tend to be very suspicious of churches that engage in that kind of thing, especially when it comes to, gifts of the spirit of healing. But that being said, the way that this church is shown with regards to Whitney's father and his issue is supposed to be like, surrender to this problem and you can find healing in this problem.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time in the last 5 years that I've seen my dad feel love and acceptance.
You see Meredith, you see Whitney, you see your father, you see what they need. God, bring us together. Let us know it's okay to love. It's okay to give up so you can take over. In Jesus' name.
What are your thoughts on that?
I think that experience clearly affected Whitney's dad. And I don't know, how do I have to be more diplomatic on YouTube than I am on the podcast? Let's see.
Right, because Whitney's dad, like, the storyline with him does not get better that, like, his storyline doesn't, it is not like an upwards trajectory from here on out, is what I will say.
And I will say that also, though, when you watch that clip, you see that Whitney's dad is really affected by the emotion of the service that's going on around him and the prayers that are being said for him. I think that the placebo effect is really powerful. And I personally don't think there's anything wrong with consensually utilizing the placebo effect to reach your goals in life, or help yourself attain what you're trying to attain. I think that we can respect that an emotional experience like that in that church service is likely brought on by music and yelling and heightened emotions of people around you and expectations that are put on you, and that it is a manufactured experience. And also still acknowledge that it meant something to Whitney's dad, and that it meant something to Whitney, and that it felt real to them in the moment. I don't think we have to choose just one of those things.
No, I think that's well put. I think that's a good way of putting this thing. It isn't until the second season of this show that we start to see allegations that Faith Temple Pentecostal is a cult, and that Mary Cosby is a cult leader, and that her congregation worships her as though she is God. The airing of season 2 coincided with the publication of a Roundtree's article in the Daily Beast. I believe it came out in September of 2021. And these allegations became such a focal point in season 2 that Mary Cosby decided not to attend the filming of the season 2 reunion episodes because she didn't want to address these rumors.
It should be apparent to all of you that Mary chose not to join us tonight. Disappointing, to say the least.
Why didn't Mary come?
I spoke to her the other day. She was pretty upset about everyone speaking behind her back about her church, and I encouraged her to come and defend her church. And she was very upset that you called her a predator and was stunned by that and kept bringing that up. So what do you think about that?
I wish she was here.
Yeah.
Because I've tried to have conversations with her throughout the season and she would not afford me the respect of a conversation.
Okay. Like, I know I've seen this before, and like, I know, like, I watched this just watching the TV show, but holy cow, I'm so upset that you would dare to talk behind my back is such a cult leader tactic.
It's also the Real Housewives where if this is a show where if nobody's talking about each other behind each other's backs, there's no show.
There's not a TV show.
Like, what are we doing here? You know,
I hear that for sure. I also think that how dare you talk about me behind my back when it is something that is a credible allegation and an allegation that should be dealt with is really, really telling of a cult leader type tactic that controlling people use. Like, we'll get into that later, I think, in part 2, where we talk about different types of cult control. But this is straight out of the cult leader playbook of, oh, if you're going to talk about me behind my back, I'm not going to respond. I'm not going to do, I'm just going to go to, how dare you talk about me, and put the blame back on the other person, deflect it that way.
Yeah, it's like, well, I did this thing to you, but you shouldn't have complained about it. And complaining about it is just as bad as me doing the thing to you. Mm-hmm. So we're both as guilty as each other.
Yep.
So Mary wasn't a cast member during season 3, and she returned as a friend of, which is like a reduced role during season 4, but then she comes back as a full-time cast member in season 5. However, during this time, Faith Temple Pentecostal has been closed for like 2 years. And so in season 6 of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, which filmed in early 2025, Mary reopens her church, and the reopening is shown as like a big triumphant moment in front of her congregation. And the way that like this is portrayed, like in season 2, it's like Mary's a cult leader. That's a main plot line. And then in season 6, it's Mary's reopening her church and we're really happy for her. I want you to open this clip to Andy Cohen talking about, you know, it's like a shocking, really a baffling change.
Wait until you see the opening of Mary Cosby's church in next week's episode. She preaches, and it is one of the best episodes of Housewives. It's my top 10. It's on my top 10 list of best episodes in Housewives history.
That's kind of a 180, if you ask me.
Do you have any other examples from Real Housewives history where some project or something that a person was doing was really vilified and then it was celebrated 4 seasons down the road? Like, is that a thing?
Off the top of my head, I can't tell you. I do think that what happens much more often is that somebody will be a villain in one season and then the next season they'll have a great season and everyone loves them again. Or somebody will be beloved in one season because they're the one leading the charge against something. And then the next season they get too big of a head and they will maybe spread some rumors about people or be seen doing something kind of shady, and people will decide that they don't like them again. Somebody flip-flopping whether or not they're portrayed as a good guy or a bad guy is something that happens pretty frequently. However, I think that, and maybe I'm a bit this is a bit skewed because this was all happening at the same time as Jen Shah, her legal battles and then going to jail, and now she's out of jail. And there's like is Jen Shah innocent? Is Jen Shah guilty? What's going on here? We don't know. The reason why I bring this up, though, is it is portrayed very differently. Mary's church reopening from season 2 to season 6. And the story relating to the church and the misconduct and the allegations of cult abuse. So, like, why is this church back on here like nothing happened? So I also think that now is a good time to talk about a couple of the serious inaccuracies that jumped out to me when I was watching Cult of the Real Housewife, because they're related to this. So in, I believe, the 3rd episode of Cult of the Real Housewife, there was an insinuation that Mary Cosby was back on Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, and part of the agreement that got her back on the show was that the church wouldn't be talked about or the church wouldn't be discussed because it made her look bad. And clearly that isn't the case, because the church is back on the show. And the discussions of the things that happened in the documentary are front and center and the focal point of episodes. So clearly that isn't true. Also, I should point out that there was an insinuation or a claim made by Cameron, who is since deceased, that he apparently said to Dan Cosby, and Dan Cosby relayed as part of his testimony on Cult of the Real Housewife, that Cameron had been the person who put Mary in touch with Lisa Barlow to get her cast as a member of the cast of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. But this, I know for a fact, isn't true, because Mary Cosby was the first cast member of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City to be cast. That she was friends with Andy Cohen before Salt Lake City was cast, because they went to the same gym in New York. And there was a Hollywood Reporter article where one of the producers says that Mary Cosby was the first person that they brought on as a cast member. So the idea that Cameron connected her with Lisa Barlow to get her cast, it just isn't accurate. And I think that's an important thing.
Said by Dan in the documentary?
Right. It was Dan repeating something that he had Cameron say to him.
That's interesting, because one way to look at that is to assume that Cameron was telling the truth, right? If Cameron believed that he was responsible for getting Mary cast on Real Housewives by introducing her to Lisa Barlow, what does that say? If Cameron was telling what he believed to be the truth, that's right. One interesting way of looking at it. It doesn't mean he was necessarily lying on purpose. What if Mary led him to believe that was true?
No, but I think that this is the kind of thing that people who are really into Bravo know who the show is formed around and who is friends with who and who got who cast on the show, because that's kind of the power dynamics behind the show. Like, if you have a bad enough relationship with the person who is central to the show, like the central cast member, then it's possible for you to get booted off. And that's kind of a thing that happens in Bravo Real Housewives franchises from time to time. So that's sort of something that people talk about. So when you come out with a documentary and you make an insinuation or an allegation that somebody who was really the first person, like the central person who was cast, is somebody who is maybe more ancillary, people are going to notice that and people are going to take issue with it. Not saying that this means that Cameron wasn't telling the truth about the things that he said happened, or that Dan Cosby wasn't telling the truth, but I think that this is just something that if you're doing your due diligence, you would say, okay, this doesn't fit, I'm going to cut that out.
Or try to explain it, or say,
right,
point out that that's not everyone would agree.
So now that we have talked about like Mary's church coming on the show in the way that it is portrayed. I want to ask you, Sadie, because you were raised in a cult, what it is that makes a cult different from a regular church.
So when we talk about cults, we talk about specific kinds of control that are exerted over people. Let's back up a moment to say that almost all organizations and even our interpersonal relationships exercise some form or some amount of control over their members. For example, most jobs have a dress code. Some jobs have a uniform. Jobs that have a dress code or a uniform are controlling what you can or can't wear at work. That doesn't mean that that control is inappropriate. If the dress code at your job is to make sure that you wear a hairnet to protect the safety of other people's food, that's appropriate control. If the dress code at your job is to ensure that you're safely and appropriately dressed to do your job, that's appropriate control. If the dress code at your job is so strict that nobody can get around it and they're measuring your length of your skirts or super strict about, that's not appropriate control. So just like jobs exert control over when you can show up to work, where you can park, what you can wear, what your hair can look like, what you can and can't do with your time when you're on the job. Those are all usually appropriate forms of control. And churches generally control some amount of the lives of their members. What a cult is not is a religious group that I don't like. A cult is a group of people, whether religious or non-religious, that exerts specific types of control over its members. Specifically, a cult exerts these types of coercive and inappropriate control over members in a specific way that leads to self-policing and circular thought that keeps people trapped in the group. These specific types of control are laid out in Dr. Stephen Hassan's BITE model, which is what we universally use on our show to talk about what is and isn't a cult.
If you watch the documentary, you are familiar with Dr. Stephen Hassan because he was in it. He was this guy.
In mind control cults, power, money, and sex are the three universals, and not always sex, but usually. That's a big red flag. My name is Dr. Stephen Hassan. I'm a cult expert, and I'm considered to be a world authority on cults and brainwashing.
If you watched The Cult of the Real Housewife, then you watched him describe how money, sex, and power are all three universal motivations for cult leaders. Which, I mean, I guess, but also, like, that's not that useful. Money, sex, and power are motivations for kind of everybody to do everything all the time. It's just deeply unspecific, right? Mm-hmm. Money, sex, and power could be a descriptor for why you go to work in the morning.
Or why people want to become president.
Or why I'm making this podcast episode right now because I want ad revenue, or it's deeply unspecific. It's deeply I personally don't find it useful because it's just so broad. It could be like, I want to get a job so that I can take somebody out on dates so that I can have sex. That's.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's too general to be specific to be used as a determining factor for saying this thing is a cult, this thing is not a cult, because this person is motivated by money, sex, and power. Whatever.
Right. It's useful in the sense of these are usually the underlying motivations of cult leaders, but it doesn't really describe how they take control.
Right. However, luckily for us, Dr. Stephen Hassan actually came up with a very specific and regimented methodology to determine whether or not something is a cult using some really specifically established criteria. This was part of the research and the analysis that we were bringing towards the documentary that didn't end up being included. which personally I found was a baffling decision. That because Dr. Stephen Hassan has not watched Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. He's the guy who came up with this methodology, but he has not watched Real Housewives of Salt Lake City to any degree, let alone a degree where you could point to it and say, yes, this is a determining factor in saying that this is a cult, which is what we did when we came out with our episode with our analysis of it. We used his methodology, but they had him on there and they didn't use this methodology. It did not make sense to us. But what he has done is he has come up with a very specific methodology called the BITE model, which is extremely useful in determining whether or not something is a cult. Sadie, would you like to take us through what that stands for and some examples of that? So let's start with, so what does BITE stand for?
So BITE stands for 4 types of coercive control: behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotion control. Behavior control is what I was talking about, like with a job. Behavior control tells you what you can wear or what you can eat. In a cult, behavior control is also controlling what people are allowed to do with their finances, controlling what people are allowed to do with their time, expecting labor and time from their members, expecting a certain amount of financial donation from their members that may be oppressive. It can also include physical and sexual abuse of congregants. Behavior control can range from things that are acceptable in some situations, like a dress code at a job, to things that are never acceptable in any situation. And that's why one of these factors doesn't make something a cult, because some behavior control can be appropriate. It becomes a cult when the behavior control is used in a way that is inappropriate and in combination with these other types of coercive control that combine to reduce someone's ability to think for themselves, reduce somebody's ability to step away from the group, and so on.
I think that this documentary did a good job of demonstrating behavior control when they were talking about the financial exploitation of members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would also bring up there was a boys camp deal that Robert Sr. was running. I think that is another pretty extreme example of behavior control within this group.
Information control is the I in BITE model. And it's the second type of coercive control. And information control basically functions by creating an in-group and an out-group. So imagine yourself in a circle. Everyone in the circle is your friend, and you can trust them to tell you the truth. And everyone outside of the circle is your enemy, and they will lie to you. And there are plenty of reasons for them to be your enemy. You know, they could be selfish, they could be out for themselves, they could be stupid, they could be immature, they could be spiritually disconnected. They could be working for the devil or some other evil entity that you don't want to listen to. But say the cult leader is somebody who is standing in the middle of the circle, and they know what's right and they know what's wrong, and they have a special ability to go outside of the circle, figure out what's true or not, and not be corrupted by the evil that's outside. I think that's how I like to explain information control to people. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add that in itself is an example of black and white thinking.
Yes.
A lot of information control is dependent on black and white thinking, like this activity is a sin or not a sin, or this person is trustworthy or untrustworthy. Information control relies on that black and white thinking to get members to discount any information that comes from outside the group at all. So the in-group, out-group dynamic and the black and white thinking are two sides of the same coin, because the members are taught everyone in this circle is always good, always right, always wants the best for you, always trustworthy. everyone outside the circle is always bad, always wrong, always out to get you, always untrustworthy. And I think the in-group, out-group thinking and the black and white thinking tend to feed off of each other and combine and kind of be two sides of the same entity there.
So whenever I'm explaining how information control works to people, I actually have taken to using an example from Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, from Mary Cosby, as like my, here, watch this clip. This is somebody doing information control. Because what she does in this clip that I'm going to show you is be the one who says, I am the most trusted source of information. If I say it, it's true. If I disagree with it, it's false. And if somebody criticizes me, they're lying. And whenever I'm explaining this concept to somebody, this is the clip that I use. I want to pull up this clip here.
Oh gosh. I saw the title of the clip, sorry.
Just have sparkling water.
Yeah.
It'll freeze your ovaries.
Oh my gosh. It does?
Harden, babe.
Harden,
Get it right.
harden.
Yeah, get it right.
Over
Get it right.
time. Mary, I need to Google that. Is that real? Is that a thing?
Everything I say, you gotta Google it. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't. Please don't do that to me.
Okay.
I mean, are you trying to diss me or?
No. I was being fun.
Please don't talk to me like I'm dumb. If I say
wait.
something, it's facts.
Done. We got it. Truth.
I mean, you really have an attitude, Lisa.
I don't.
I feel like you do. You're doing all this to me, whatever. You know, I don't.
No,
I don't
like
deal
the
with little
same-
girls like you.
I don't even understand what's happening.
Have a quiet time, babe. But how about we Google what she says? Because most of the time she's lying. Oh, did I just say that?
That was also a great example of Darvo.
Yeah.
In case you need a clip for that as well.
So in this clip, if you're a Housewives fan, this clip is kind of iconic in that Mary Cosby says that carbonation hardens your ovaries, and so you shouldn't drink carbonated beverages. Lisa Barrow's like, is that true? And Mary Cosby's like, disagreeing with me is a sin. You can't do that. And just goes nuts.
Right. And there's a lot that you see, like cult leader wise in that clip. She immediately turns to, so first her response is, well, how could you do that to me? Don't do that to me. Don't like feel like you have to check up on me. If I say it, it's right. Don't do that to me is an immediate cult leader tactic. And then she switches quickly to shaming or trying to embarrass Lisa for standing up to her by saying, I don't deal with little girls like you.
Yeah.
So she's using multiple tactics in this like rapid fire way to express that it is not okay to say you want to Google something she said to make sure she's correct about carbonation and ovaries.
Which, by the way, you can Google this. This is not, in fact, true. You see in this situation, like even questioning whether or not something Mary says is true is taken as such a slight that she will make the whole situation unpleasant and attack anyone, thereby forcing everyone involved to just like go along with whatever it is that she says. The other most common form of information control is to restrict cult members from interacting with outside or dissenting voices, or restricting their access to people who might take them away from the group as an isolation tactic. Sadie, do you want to talk about your experiences with this?
Yeah. So information control is designed to prevent people from getting new ideas. You were talking about how information control treats people as either insiders or outsiders, and there's no in between. It's very black and white. If someone is labeled as an outsider, members are told that their views and any information that they present is totally invalid. Members might be told that person is an enemy who is lying about us, or they don't know the truth because you need to be part of the group to understand truth, or they're being used by Satan. There's a really serious double down effect when someone who is previously part of that in group becomes part of the out group. generally, the more trusted someone was, the closer they were to that middle of the circle that you were describing, the more violently they're thrown out and the more distrusted they become when they leave the group. One of the most classic examples of this from the cult that I was raised in happened actually a few years before I was born. Jack Hyles, the person on the picture behind you, was the pastor of a mega church in Hammond, Indiana. We'll talk more about him when we do the first family of fundamentalism. In 1989, when he was the pastor of this very large church with many schools and colleges affiliated with it, etc., he was accused of having an affair with a woman who worked for the church. His accuser was Robert Sumner, who previously was very well regarded in fundamentalism and involved with the Sword of the Lord, which is the most famous fundamentalist newspaper. So when Robert Sumner accused Jack Hyles of having this affair, Jack Hyles leveraged his power against Sumner full force. Hyles engaged in character assassination, not only denying all of Sumner's claims, making claims of his own that Sumner was being used of Satan to attack his ministry. Vic Nischik was the husband of the woman in question who Hyles was accused of having an affair with. Vic Nischik released a tell-all book called The Wizard of God, My Life with Jack Hyles, which is very hard to find, but I do now have a copy. In response to that book, Nischik was cut off from his own children, from his social connections at the church. He lost his position on the deacon board, and people who had formerly known him through the church would not even speak with him. His book was anathema. No one would have dared be caught with it. I personally believe that staff members of the church have been collecting, hoarding, and destroying copies of this book over time to make it even more rare. But that's a story for another day. So yeah, information control is not just don't read this book, but also don't talk to the person who wrote it, and also don't talk to anyone who read it. With the exception being the leader and the extreme inner circle, who are allowed to read the banned material so they can tell everyone else how evil it is and how much you need to stay away from it.
I want to talk about the church split that happened at Faith Temple Pentecostal. This was known colloquially as the Walkout Service.
The Walkout Service, yeah.
Yeah, and I want to talk about this with regards to information control and also thought control. But first I want to ask Sadie, what usually happens when a church splits?
I think church splits typically happen one of two ways. Either there's a strong leader who may or may not be using inappropriate coercive control, and then a member-led group stands up against this leader and says, we've had enough. Or there's a leader in power who may or may not be using coercive control, and a second leader who also may or may not be using coercive control wants power and criticizes the original leader, leading a group of people away from the original leader. Churches split over all kinds of things, like huge theological issues like predestination, or major fundamentalist opinions like the use of the King James Bible only, which might not seem like a huge deal to those of us who are not fundamentalist Christians, and to them it is a huge deal. Or issues that seem really small to us, like whether women are allowed to wear pants or whether people need to wear head coverings in church. It's normal for there to be hurt feelings, just like in a breakup. A religious community doesn't just split over something that's not important to them. It's also common for one or both or all sides of a church split to engage in methods of coercive control, like information control. They tell their side or their team or their group that the other group is wrong about everything. They're fundamentally liars. They're bad people. And you'll really see this get to the point of villainizing in Christian groups in particular. This so often turns to villainizing these people who were your former friends and neighbors in your religious community for who knows how many years. You may be told that they were never saved. They were never Christians to begin with. They were demons in disguise, or they were being influenced by the devil the whole time. They were never who you thought they were. in situations where a church split happens due to coercive control, or that is a factor in a split, people will not even be allowed to or able to grieve the connections that they've lost. These people that they've known potentially their whole lives, because they're being told, oh no, that was never real. These people were never trustworthy. They were faking it the whole time. And that's a really, really deep grief that people can carry in after something like this happens.
So the split in Faith Temple Pentecostal was covered pretty heavily in Cult of the Real Housewife. And the issue that they were splitting over was whether or not Mary and Robert should get married. And, correct. And so this ended up culminating in Walkout Sunday, or the Walkout Service, which happened in April of 1998.
I thought the story of the Walkout Service was really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
It's rare to have footage of something like this happening in real time. So that was,
riveting.
In and of itself was pretty interesting.
It was truly, I was amazed to see that they actually got their hands on the footage from that.
Yeah, the archival footage was really neat.
I wanted to bring this up because church split is a great example, not of just how information control works, but also of how thought control works. And this is where I can show you an example of Mary Cosby using thought control tactics to rewrite the memory of her church members.
Rewriting memories is scary stuff.
Yeah, but you can see it happen in real life in an episode of in season 6 of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. And it's crazy to watch because to me, I can watch this and say, I see what's going on here. That's nuts. And it just gets broadcast as part of a reality TV show broadcast, and everyone's just like, oh, whatever, and it slips by. But if you know what you're looking for, it's deeply disturbing. So thought control is a method of cult control by which the cult leader can get members to filter basically every thought that they have through a specific lens. The cult leader uses information control to dictate what is and isn't reality, but they use thought control to get members to accept that version of reality. And so now everything that they perceive has to go through that lens, go through that worldview, go through that, maybe that theological bias. And it can
this is something that I've talked about a lot in reference to Dr. Hassan's bite model for cults in general. My opinion is that, like we were talking about earlier, lots of groups or even interpersonal relationships use some method of appropriate or inappropriate control. Where the line is for me when something becomes a cult is that the thought control and the emotion control are used to get people to inflict the behavior control and information control on themselves. Like, for me, that's the line. It's because behavior control is visible. You can see whether or not someone is dressing according to your dress code or going to a movie theater if they're not allowed to do that. You can't see if someone is thinking dissenting thoughts or feeling banned emotions. I think one of the truest signs of a cult among a group that is coercive or is controlling is whether the thought control is internalized in people's minds and it causes them to inflict the other types of control upon themselves and police their own behaviors, information, emotions.
Thought control can be used to teach believers to suppress dissident thoughts or dissenting thoughts. And it can be used to teach believers to use circular logic on themselves to keep their brains like on message.
Right. Like telling kids to laugh when you hear the phrase millions and billions of years ago.
What, that's how they taught you about evolution?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that when we went to OMSI.
If I laugh, it must be a joke. Therefore, I laugh when I hear this thing. It can be also used to teach thought-stopping cliches or, popular turns of phrase to suppress critical thinking. However, the thing that I want to show you is an example of thought control being used to rewrite people's memories. So in Cult of the Real Housewife, we are shown footage of what happened when Faith Temple Pentecostal split, when they had what was known as the Walkout Service. And we have pretty incontrovertible evidence of what happened. We have stories from people who were there telling us what happened, and we have Mary and Robert Cosby's version of events, which are clearly different from what we saw in the recording. Or we see something that happened in the recording, and then we see a slight turn of that, like a perversion of that to fit a narrative. And what they've basically been telling their congregation happened since just after it happened. But we know that that's not true because we've seen the footage of what actually happened. So why would you keep telling a story for years and years and years if it's clearly not what happened? This is what you do when you are trying to use mind control to rewrite people's memories. You reinforce this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened, even if the evidence says something different.
Yeah, it's an old saying, if you repeat a lie often enough and loudly enough, it will become the truth. And you might even start to believe that it's true. If you lie to other people so many times over and over, that can become like truth for the person who's telling the lie as well.
So in an episode of season 6 of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, Mary Cosby is preparing to reopen her church after a few years of renovation. I should also note that in episode 3 of Cult of the Real Housewife, there is speculation that the renovations never happened, but these renovations finished sometime before February of 2025. So that's not true. So I don't know why you would just not delete this.
Right. Well, we know that that principal filming for the documentary was done before December of 2024. So they wouldn't have known when it was filmed, but they've had almost a year since it happened during the editing process.
Yeah, that just doesn't make sense to me personally. If I was personally making this documentary and I was like, oh, well, I had somebody saying this thing, but clearly that thing isn't true, I would cut that thing out of it. In the scene in season 6 of Real Housewives, Mary is sitting and talking with her cousin, Big Joe. Big Joe is the contractor who's done the renovations on the church. And the story of the church split comes up. The documentary refers to this once again as the Walkout Service. It's featured quite heavily in Cult of the Real Housewife. And I'm going to put this footage up right here. So the backstory of this is that in January of 1997, Mama Cosby tragically passes of heart disease. About a year later, in April of 1998, it's kind of the lead up to Mary's wedding to Robert. Robert has been calling church members to get their support for this, but a lot of people are against it, including Mary's mother, Rosalind Cazares. The story that is told by the former Faith Temple members is the story that is backed up by the footage that we have of this. Rosalind gets up on the pulpit and lambasts what she sees as hypocrisy, what she sees as something that is not right. And this causes chaos, this causes turmoil. People are scuffling, yelling, trading words. It's out of control. And somebody calls the police, who break the situation up. And the opponents of Mary and Robert's marriage walk out of the church. Now, I want to compare that to what the story that Mary and Big Joe tell in season 6 of Real Housewives.
For some reason, my mom thought she was supposed to take everything over.
Yeah.
How?
I don't know.
You know, you think Mary, that was odd to both of us. Like, marry me? He obeyed what Mama wanted.
That's all
he wasn't trying to do anything extra. My grandmother told her. So we were all clear of what my grandmother wanted. But once my grandmother passed, my mom just started trying to take over everything, and things got bad. My mom, she wanted her way, and she couldn't get her way.
She wanted that power. She came in with a crew. Regular church was going on.
They had like a dark cloud.
They had a plan. She got up like she was going to direct the choir and said that she was pretty much leaving, but the police was called, and they asked them, who do you want out? And
Someone was escorted out.
Somebody that thought they weren't going nowhere was escorted out.
I see the same tactics
Right.
in this conversation with Big Joe as she was using in the much more silly carbonated ovaries clip. It's the
What
same
are your
tactics. So she is phrasing what she says in a way that makes it easier to agree with her than to disagree. She's not leaving any space for disagreement. She's using her facial expressions to show contempt for anyone who disagrees with her story or the bad guys in her story. She
or casting aspersions on their motivations.
Mm-hmm. She's using her body language and her facial expressions to transmit to Big Joe what she wants him to feel and say about this story. And because he is under her coercive control, he is reflecting back to her exactly what she's asking for when she's telling him what, with her body language, with her facial expressions, with her tone of voice, what she wants him to say.
Right. The way that Mary describes this situation is that following Mama's death, there's a power struggle. But the reality is that Mama passes in January of 97. This doesn't come to a head until April of 98. That's more than a year later of Robert Cosby running this church. And
right. What's also interesting is that nobody else identifies this power struggle.
Right. And nobody says, we're trying to take over this church now. And the thing that they have the objection to is Robert's marriage to Mary. But, and that's the thing that makes the church split, whereas Mary is portraying this as, oh, well, they just want to take over the church. And the way that she tells this story, it's like her mother comes in with a militia of people to try to overthrow Robert. They bring the police, but then the police turn on them and make them leave. Like it's Game of Thrones, and it's Littlefinger turning on Ned. But we know that's not what happened, because this was over a year after Mama's death, and Robert was at this time fully and indisputably in control of the church. However, this isn't how Mary portrays it. And the nature of the conversation that she has with Big Joe about this is important. Mary narrates the story to Big Joe in less of a, do you remember what happened kind of way, and more of a, this is what happened, you agree, right? Kind of way. And now this is happening decades after the fact, but we see that there's a reinforcement of the cult mind control to rewrite people's memories in what I describe as something called like commentator's consciousness. I don't know if there's another term for it, but that's how, like, where you can effectively change how events are perceived as they're happening and rewrite people's memories of these things in real time and then reinforce them later. Can I explain how this works?
Yeah, 100%.
So say you're watching like a football game, right? On TV. Football is a super chaotic sport, and it's hard to see what's going on everywhere all at once. If you're like me, you're probably like watching the quarterback. You're like, is the quarterback going to pass? Or are they going to run it? Are they going to hand it off? Whatever. But then the play's over. You see a holding penalty called, say. Can you tell whether that call was good or not? No, you can't, because you were watching the quarterback. You didn't notice what the lineman's hands were doing in the moment, so you rely on the commentators and the replay to tell you whether or not the refs made a good call, or whether the refs made a bad call, because you're not an expert enough to judge whether or not something was a hold. But chances are, if the commentators say, oh, that penalty was good, you're going to be like, yeah, that's a perfectly fine penalty. But the reality is you don't know. And what the commentators say about this in the moment is going to affect people's collective consciousness about it when they're discussing it later. So think about this phenomena in the context of a different part of your life. Something, say more difficult, more traumatic. So say you're in the passenger seat of a car and there's a crash You're not expecting there to be a car crash unless you're like hyper anxious, which you might be expecting there to be a car crash, but you're not expecting there to be a car crash. You're not paying that much attention. Maybe you're looking at your phone. You're not really paying attention until after it happens. The police show up to the scene of the accident and ask the driver what happened. Now, whoever's driving the car has a vested interest in making the accident seem like it's not their fault. So when the police or when the insurance company asks them about it, they're going to frame it in such a way to make it seem like it's not their fault. And you're present for the accident. You probably don't remember exactly what happened. So you're just going to agree with the person who is narrating the events. This affects the way that you perceive an event in the immediate aftermath of the event, which then affects the way that this event gets encoded into your brain as a memory.
Yes. Psychology fun fact.
Yeah.
If I may. Your memories are actually not your memories of the event. So like, Gavi, your memory of the day that you proposed to your fiance about a year ago.
Literally 364 days before we were recording this.
Yeah. I remember those times. Those are good times. Okay, so your memory of proposing to your wonderful fiance is not actually your memory of proposing to her, unfortunately. It's your memory of the last time you thought about proposing to her. That memory gets re-encoded every time you replay or think about a memory from your past. It gets recoded in your brain. So you're not actually remembering when you proposed. You're remembering the last time you thought about when you proposed, which then you weren't remembering when you proposed either. You were remembering the last time before that you thought about when you proposed. And this is why eyewitness testimony can be really unhelpful in certain cases. This is how people who are coercive and abusive can rewrite the memories of victims and survivors to change what they perceived to have happened in the real world. And this is, of course, how cult leaders capitalize on this little mental foible of humanity to rewrite history and have people believe it.
So I want to apply this and show our listeners and our viewers what we are looking at in this scene where Mary is talking to Big Joe. Because
absolutely.
Mama Cosby's death qualifies as a traumatic event in the church, I would say. Just hearing about how much everyone loved her. Faith Temple Pentecostal Church is mourning her loss. Meanwhile, Rosalind gets up there and causes a commotion, and people who you grew up with, people who you love, are fighting each other. The police arrive. Team Rosalind leaves. And in the immediate aftermath, Mary and Robert have a captive audience of those who remained in the church and who supported their union. They have a very limited opportunity to kind of shape the narrative while the shock is still fresh. And in doing so, they tell a story that Rosalind was power hungry, that Rosalind wanted to take the church over and seize power against Mama's wishes, but that Mama's wishes are actually that Mary and Robert should be wed. And that needs to be honored. So Rosalind is not to be trusted, and nobody who aligns with her is to be trusted either, because they were able to get the message out to their loyal members in the immediate aftermath. It becomes encoded in the memories of people like Big Joe, who's Mary's cousin, who is also a general contractor who's doing renovations on their church. So when Mary sits down with Joe to discuss this and retell the story, this is her saying, this is what happened. You agree this is what happened, right? Let me make sure that this is still being encoded the way that I thought that it's supposed to be encoded. And she's using this cult control tactic, this coercive tactic, to effectively rewrite the memories of church members in the immediate aftermath, and continuing to do it for decades and decades and decades going on forward. And it was crazy to me to watch this on actual television, to see what she was doing on actual television. Like, I felt insane that they showed this conversation on a Real Housewives episode, and people are just like, oh yeah, that's just what's going on. And if you're like us watching this, you're like what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would definitely point out that in this situation, Mary is absolutely using this psychological tool whereby memories are re-encoded every time that they are brought back to a person's memory. This is also why you might see cult leaders or people who are abusers or coercive in other ways bring up stories from the past consistently. Like, you will see this actually in abusive relationships. People who are abusive partners will bring up past disagreements constantly, not just once or not just, wow, yeah, that thing happened and this is what I learned from it, but over and over and over, the same perceived things that you did that hurt their feelings or were a problem. Over and over and over and over, because every time they do that, they can capitalize on that neuroplasticity to rewrite a little bit of how you perceive that situation. That is why in an abusive relationship, you might feel like your actions are totally justified. And then after you've talked through it with your partner and fought about it with your partner 10 times or 20 times, you suddenly believe that you were always wrong and that you were wrong from the beginning. You just weren't able to see it. This is the same tactic that Mary is using. And on top of that very powerful mind control tactic, she also has power as the co-pastor and the first lady of this church. It's been well established that agreeing with her is seen as wise and virtuous. She will praise you. Disagreeing with her is seen as unwise and sinful, and she will attempt to humiliate you. Mary has the power to financially reward people who agree with her, as well as reward them in relationships and status within the church. Even more than that, in this early traumatic time after the blow up, after the walkout service, the people who stayed are already people, like you were saying, who believe in Mary and Robert. Those people have a human need to feel good about themselves and to feel good about their own choices. This makes them even more vulnerable to the initial rewrite of the situation. And then it continues to make them even more vulnerable to the repetitions of the rewrite of that situation. So there's actually, I would say, 3 major psychological tactics at play here that are all working together to incentivize people to go along with Mary's version of events and to not just financially or relationally, but neurochemically reward people for following along with Mary's story.
So I think that's a really good explanation of how thought control works with real examples. Do you want to move on to emotion control? I was hoping you could explain this. Explain how emotion control works. Cool.
Well, thought control and emotion control, as I was saying earlier, are
they're linked.
Yes, and they're necessarily different from behavior control and information control, because behavior control can be policed from the outside. So thought control replaces individual thought patterns with repeated cliches, thought-stopping cliches, with approved thought patterns. It causes people to run their thoughts through a filter of, is this thought appropriate? Is it approved by the cult leader? Yeah, so emotion control functions really similarly. It causes people to filter their emotions through a matrix of, is this an acceptable emotion to feel? Emotion control tells people that some emotions are bad and sinful to feel them, and other emotions are good and okay to feel. One emotion that you might see categorized as sinful would be anger or discontentment. So if you're complaining about the state of things at the church, if you're angry about the way that people are being treated at the church, if you're angry about the feeling that you don't have power in what's going on in your church community, those emotions can be coded or declared unacceptable, bad, sinful. Yeah, a person who's experiencing emotion control might be told, okay, so this, if you feel this emotion, that is a sin. So you need to make yourself feel something else. You need to make yourself feel a different emotion. So to replace, if you feel discontented at the state of the church, or if you feel angry that you don't have power in what's going on in your religious community, you need to replace that feeling with contentment, where you are at peace that God's will be done, or whatever. Or you need to replace that anger with humility. Well, I'm not allowed to be angry about things that are going on in this community, because anger, feeling the emotion of anger, is a sin. And I am instead supposed to just trust God and be humble and believe that my leaders know what they're doing. So emotion control, like thought control, it isn't something some people can see from the outside. It's something that you as the person in that situation have to inflict upon yourself from the inside. And that's why I think thought control and emotion control are so vital to the definition of what makes a cult, and so incredibly hard to break. Because what if a person has been in a cult, they've been taught this pattern over potentially years or even decades of your thoughts are not okay, your thoughts are sinful to feel, try not to feel them. Or your emotions are not okay, your emotions are sinful to feel, try not to feel them. And they've been conditioned, like I know this was my experience growing up in a cult, they've been conditioned to question and not accept any thought or emotion that they have, so that they can then be in the habit of replacing those emotions with emotions that are approved of by the cult leader. And that habit sticks with you long after you leave a cult. How long? At least 12 years. Ask me how I know.
So I want to talk about emotion control with regards to one specific clip here.
Absolutely.
From a recent episode from season 6 of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. In this clip, the backstory for this is Rosalind Cazares, who's Mary's mother, has recently passed. And Mary discusses the passing of her mother from the church pulpit at the service where she is reopening her church.
Okay.
And this, to me, was very disturbing. And it was insane to me that this was broadcast and that Andy Cohen was like, you guys won't believe how amazing this church service was. But watch this.
This is one I have not seen yet, and I am dreading it.
I was thinking about my mom, and she passed a couple months ago, and I wasn't invited to her funeral. You know, they left me out, and I was okay. I said, Lord, what about her soul? What about her soul? Did her soul make it? You have to do the right thing. You have to say the right thing. You have to think right. You have to act right. It don't matter where you are. Because when you lay down and leave this earth, your soul has to pay the price.
Man, she was trying so hard to make tears over her mom.
That was such an insane clip to like. Mary and her mother have been estranged since the church split, since she married Robert.
Right.
But in this clip, I see something extremely disturbing in that Mary, you know, she's lamenting not being invited to her mother's funeral, which completely understandable. And she's lamenting that she's estranged from that branch of her family. But then from the pulpit, she openly questions whether or not her mother's soul made it to heaven. And she doesn't openly say she and I were not on good terms, so she didn't go to heaven, but that's heavily implied.
Right. Like, could someone who's on bad terms with me really be righteous enough to go to heaven? Is kind of the implication here.
Yeah, and there's a level of like, I feel bad about this thing, therefore this isn't the way that you have to control your emotions, the way that you have to, like, who is it okay for me to feel grief for? Who is it okay for you to feel grief for? Should you be grieving this person if this person is potentially not in heaven? What is going on here? Should you be grieving a person who doesn't see the same, who isn't on the same side of this split as I am?
I think if you don't understand where Mary is coming from theologically, then maybe it's a lot easier to pass over.
Right, because you can see the other cast members, they're like, oh, this is really emotional for her. Like, what's, she's, this is, but for
right,
us,
like, I don't, if you're listening to her words, as somebody who does not understand where she's coming from theologically, which I think other cast members wouldn't likely, because they are all from different religious traditions than she is, then it might seem like, oh, she's just being emotional and she's kind of rambling, because Mary does. And Mary definitely does that. Sometimes she just says stuff. Sometimes people just say wild things. Sometimes they are Mary Cosby. So I think maybe that's why other cast members didn't have the reaction to that clip that we did. Because we know things that they don't know about Mary's theological background, and actually about Rosemary's theological background, that make that a lot bigger of a deal.
Yeah. Especially when, and I want to play this one clip where this is from the documentary in which Mary describes herself as the mediator between God and the people.
During a sermon on Housewives, there is a man that gets on his knees in front of her at the altar. You have a woman reading this letter to her.
You are my perfect love. God's love for his people reigns in you. You are the facsimile of God.
You have another congregation member screaming out that Mary's the best friend that she's ever had.
You've been the best friend.
People are crying. It's a very intense moment.
I'll never leave you. I promise. I'll stay with you.
Her church putting her equal to God becomes a real point of concern and gives credence to this accusation that this could be a cult.
Well, there is one God and one mediator between God and man. Who do you think that is? You.
And so she is kind of putting herself as like the one arbiter.
Right. I would like to point out that the quote that she is quoting from scripture is, there is one God and one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. So she's saying she's Jesus. Like, that is that's the complete quote that she is conveniently leaving the end off of.
Tune into next episode, by the way, where we discuss actually theologically why she says that she is Jesus and why they believe that she is God.
I could not be more excited to get into this. I think the reasons that people believe that they are God are interesting, but the reasons that people believe that other people are God are way more interesting, and I just cannot wait to dive in. Oh my gosh.
The emotional control allegations and the cult allegations basically are dependent on Mary Cosby's congregation at Faith Temple Pentecostal believing that she is God. And if you're watching this or listening to this right now and you're a Christian, you're probably thinking, well, if I was in a church and the pastor claimed to be God, then I would stand right up and walk out of there, which wouldn't blame you if you did.
Would hope so.
If I was in a church and the congregation were worshiping the pastor like the pastor was God, then I would leave, which if you get in that situation, that sounds like you have good judgment that you would leave from that situation. Yeah. Sadie was able to find out the actual theological reason why Mary Cosby's congregation believes that she is God. She found a thread.
Mary isn't just she isn't just depending on her charisma, her wealth, her marriage to Robert Sr., or even her implication that she may be her grandmother reincarnated. Those aren't the things she's depending on to support the idea that she just might be God. There's actually something.
They're like supporting evidence, but that's not the main thing.
It's not what she's depending on. What she's depending on is much deeper, and I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
And you know, I really do commend you for finding the thread that explains why this congregation was primed to believe this about Mary years or even decades before she and Robert took over the church. And this is when we're going to have to talk about Mama Cosby.
Let's go. I'm so excited.
So when we were on set filming for this documentary, and this is maybe a little bit of inside baseball, and we were told by the filmmakers that the former members of Faith Temple Pentecostal agreed to film with them on the condition that Mama Cosby would not be disparaged in any way. And Sadie and I are not bound to that promise. I don't think that Mama Cosby was an awful, bad, terrible person, or that she was bad. I think that there were serious issues with her ministry that got glossed over by this documentary. And I think that the reason why Mary and Robert were able to run this place like a cult was because it was set up in such a way that made that very easy, as long as there was somebody who wasn't particularly benevolent in charge. And they were just fortunate in that for years and years and years of this church existing, Mama Cosby was in charge and she was benevolent.
Yeah, I really like how you said that, because something I feel like I fight a lot in the world of talking about cults and coercive control is that the idea that in order to enact any amount of coercive control over another person, you must be completely evil and irredeemable and have bad intentions. And that's simply not true. I think that it is totally possible for someone to have good intentions and use bad practices that lead to an element of coercive control. I think this happens all the time in relationships, because what we've been taught about relationships, we've been taught that extreme jealousy is normal. We've been taught that these things are normal, and someone who wants to love their partner well will display this extreme jealousy because they believe that's what you do when you love somebody. It doesn't mean that their intentions are all completely evil and they're an irredeemable, horrible person. They're playing out these bad patterns of coercive control, and they may not even know it. And I think somebody like Mama Cosby, it's totally possible to have good intentions and bad practices, and those things are coming to a head in a way that still results in some amount of coercive control.
Right. Sadie and we're not planning on denigrating her character, her motivations. I want to put that out there right away. I just haven't seen anything that makes me feel like Mama Cosby was a bad person, or that she wanted anybody to get hurt. Right. I think, however, it is evident that Faith Temple Pentecostal under Mama Cosby still held many hallmarks of cult control. Mm-hmm. And so we were told by the documentary's director that our research was excluded because it was heavily based on the bite model, and that the bite model methodology was too repetitive for TV. And that Dr. Hassan's 3 universals theory of power, money, and sex as cult leader motivation were deemed more relevant. Maybe they're more relevant in that they're general and that you can just point at them for anything, and that it's whatever. My personal opinion is that it's impossible to talk about the bite model in this setting and also ignore the evidence that it also applied to Faith Temple Pentecostal before Mary and Robert took over while Mama was still alive. And because Mama's motivations were probably pure, power and money and sex don't apply there in the same way. And so if you use that as your methodology, then you can't really say, oh, well, this is problematic what she was doing.
Right.
While her church's practices and organization were not what I would describe as healthy or good or a holistic and positive way to have your church set up.
Yeah, something that I talked about, I think, in our original podcast episode almost 2 years ago, is how it's possible for Mary Cosby to be both a villain and a victim in this situation. This is something we also talk about a ton whenever anyone says the name Anna Duggar to me. I tend to go off on a little bit of a rant about this. Mary Cosby is someone who's now exerting cult control over other people. She is being an abusive leader currently. And she still may or may not be a victim of Robert Sr. We don't know what went down in the early stages of that relationship. We don't know whether he groomed her on purpose to cause this church split and consolidate power under his own name, or whether Mary came up with the idea all along and seduced her step-grandpa to consolidate power under herself. Either one of those could be true, or 100 other options. And it is entirely possible for Mary to be someone who's enacting coercive control now, someone who is abusive now, and also someone who has experienced and survived abuse in the past. And just like that, it is possible for Faith Temple Pentecostal to have long-term hallmarks of a cult, long-term issues with coercive control, and for Mama to still be a generally pretty good person. It's not quite that black and white. And if you're told that black and white is the only way to look at things, you might be in a cult.
That was very well put. So next time we're going to be talking about Faith Temple Pentecostal, the theological beliefs behind it, the practices behind it, prior to Mary and Robert's takeover. And that's something that I'm really excited for. And we're going to talk about the absolutely insane connection to one of the most infamous cult leaders of all time. Really excited to show that to you guys. If you can't wait until the episode airs to listen to that, well, it's probably available on our Patreon right now at patreon.com/Leaving Eden Podcast. Otherwise, hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel and you will get it here within the next couple of days. We can't wait to show it to you. It's fascinating. It's truly, truly, truly fascinating stuff. And this is the same theological DNA that came to Jim Jones, to Mama Cosby, to Faith Temple Pentecostal in Salt Lake City.
Faith Temple is asserting their belief that Jesus was not the Son of God. So if Mama is perfect, then God can manifest himself through her the same way he manifested himself through Jesus.
Robert Cosby had conspired to forge these signatures.
They've given the church $300,000.
Gucci bags are a business expense.
Yes, that means that Mama did something wrong because she didn't protect the church.